My name's Connor. I'm the Director of Outreach at the Wildlife Center of Virginia, and I'm so excited to host you all today for this really cool event with Rosalie. Um, some of you may be familiar with the Wildlife Center. I'm sure some of you maybe don't know much about the Wildlife Center, but we are just about 5 minutes down the road from here. We are a nonprofit wildlife hospital for native wildlife. And this year we've already admitted more than 4,000 animals, and those are all sorts of animals you can think of, ranging from, the big guys like bald eagles and black bears to the tiny creatures of the world as well. And this is a very important time of year for us because this is our Gala Week, which is the biggest fundraiser of the year for the Wildlife Center. And we usually, for our gala, have a week-long programs. We have a program each day, and we decided one of the best programs we could host in person to kick things off is with Rosalie today, to learn more about her book, and also get to see her do a live painting of our American Kestrel ambassador, Clover. Now, I met Rosalie, I think in 2022, a couple years ago, when she was in the middle of her process of creating this book. She stopped in at the Wildlife Center. She saw one of our programs, and I believe one of our ambassadors may be in that book, which I'm really excited to see. So all these years later, as we were planning this gala, we happened to see that the book had was just about to be published. We thought it was the perfect time to invite you out and have you here for this event, especially because, again, it really ties in with our work at the Wildlife Center. When people think of the Wildlife Center, they often think of those really large animals that we take care of. But we're a hospital for all native wildlife, for salamanders, for toads, for frogs, for mice, for all of the little creatures as well that may make an appearance in this book. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rosalie. Thank you again so much for coming on out.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. Had some neighbors from my childhood home surprise me from like 6 hours away or 5 hours. So that was cool. I have an uncle here, some friends that I got to hike with while I was making this book. So it's just great to see all of you here. Today I'm going to be talking about Tiny Worlds, which came out about a month ago. And this was definitely a passion project for me. It was from the time I conceived of the project to publication, it was a little over 3 years. And I'm very proud of this book, so I'm excited to share it with you today. So this is where my love for tiny creatures began. I was 8 years old when I received my first hamster for Christmas. Her name was Golden Red Haizlett. And I just fell head over heels for rodents. Do we have any rodent fans in the house? Oh, like 5. That's awesome. And so I feel like a lot of kids have rodent phases or hamster phases, but mine was just intense. It spun off into a love for all rodents. I had some mice, I had bunnies, which I thought were rodents, but they're not. And I even formed the first Brooke County Rodent Club. I don't know if you all knew this was happening in your backyard, but yeah, I rented out the Bethany Memorial Church basement for my rodent club meetings. Yeah. So yeah, I loved rodents, and one of the things I loved about them was just how much personality was packed into a critter that was like a few inches tall. I noticed that between all the different hamsters and mice that I had, each one, they had different quirks, they had different hobbies, they had different wheel spinning habits and sleeping schedules. So yeah, that's kind of where that love began. I also really loved art from a young age. Here are a couple of my early paintings. This was, I think, one of my first watercolors on the left. I remember being very, very proud of that piece. And so art was just kind of my way to enjoy being part of things without actually being in the center of the chaos. I would kind of like often sit in the corner and sketch, and I could feel like I was a part of things in a way that made sense to me. So I was always an observer, and I always liked just kind of taking in the world, capturing it with art. And so these loves kind of started to merge together, this love for tiny critters and this appreciation for tiny critters, and then also this lifelong passion for art kind of started to come together as I got older And I just developed this love for creatures that are camouflaged, creatures that are tiny, creatures that very few people pay attention to or celebrate. I kept noticing, like, in nature art, there are so many repetitive subjects, which they're beautiful, like things like roses or things like idyllic, beach landscape are wonderful. But I was interested in celebrating the creatures that are a little strange, that don't often get the spotlight, things like slime molds and mushrooms and snails and salamanders. So that love came together, and I started a personal project. So this book started out as a very small personal project in 2017 called Tiny Worlds of West Virginia. And so my goal was just every month to learn about a new creature and paint it with watercolor. I wanted to get better at watercolor. I'd been using watercolor my whole life, but I'd often used, I'd done the whole drawing in ink and then just added a little watercolor on top. And I wanted to figure out how to paint things with only watercolor. So that was kind of the artistic goal for this. And I also just wanted to learn more about what was living in West Virginia. So that was just a fun personal project. And then a big idea came, inspired by my love for my home, for the Appalachian Mountain region. And this is where I grew up, not in the tiny cabin. That would be cool. But this is the family farm that I grew up on, just one of the fields. And it's in the northern panhandle of West Virginia near Wheeling. And growing up, I thought that this was the definition of natural beauty. I loved the farm. I still love the farm. And the lush fields and there were lots of trees, it just rolling hills, it felt like, this is how nature should be. And it wasn't until I started to learn more about ecology as I got older that I realized that this farm had had a lot taken from it. This farm was heavily strip mined before my grandfather purchased it in the mid-1900s. And there are a lot of scars that still remain, and it's very obvious as you get to know more about the natural world that, like, sinkholes aren't really a naturally occurring thing, that mud is not orange, that's acid mine drainage, and that you should be able to swim in the creek. There's a creek that runs through, and when we were little, we were told by the doctor not to swim in it because it gave us rashes. And so it's hard to grapple with something when you, love this home, and you appreciate it, but also you see that so much has been taken from it. And as I started to zoom out on the whole Upper Ohio Valley region, the Ohio River runs 10 minutes from the family farm, and it's just lined with smokestacks and industry. And I think that has carried through all over the Appalachian region, as I'm sure you're all very well aware. There are a lot of natural gas and fossil fuels and everything here, and a lot of people have come and taken a lot from these mountains. So that was I went through this phase where I had this negative feeling about not only the farm, but also the Appalachian region, because I just felt like, man, this place has been wrecked. People have taken a lot from this. And then I would see hopeful messages too, though, that the Appalachian Mountains are one of the most biodiverse regions in the United States still, and that it's the salamander capital of the world. The Southern Appalachians are the salamander capital of the world. 77 species live there, more than any other place in the whole world. And so I just held these two things in my heart for a while, that so much has happened here. It could be so much better, but also it's so important still. And so I started to think about how I could tell the story of a mountain range that's important and deserves to be protected and rehabilitated through the eyes of tiny creatures that live here that so many people don't even know are here. And a big part of our biodiversity is the little guys, the mussels and the salamanders and snails. And if we don't know they're there, we're probably not gonna see this as a place that needs to be protected. So a couple of fun things about the Appalachian Mountains. They span more than 2,000 miles from Alabama to Newfoundland, and they are some of the oldest mountains on Earth, with a formation that began between 500 and 300 million years ago with the collision of African and North American continental plates. And like I just said, they've been subjected to widespread extraction over the past 300 years, and despite it all, they are one of the most biodiverse places in the US. So there are 3 long-distance hiking trails that kind of connect the mountain range. They don't all connect perfectly, but they come up to, within close proximity. So the first is the Pinhoti Trail that starts in Alabama, northern Alabama. That's actually where the Appalachian Mountains begin. A lot of people associate the mountains with Georgia to Maine, because that's where the Appalachian Trail is, but that's only one portion of the mountain chain. It's a lot of different subranges composed in one chain. So it starts with the Pinhoti Trail that takes you from northern Alabama to Georgia, and then you can hop on the Appalachian Trail and go all the way up to Baxter State Park in Maine. And then from there, you can hop on the International Appalachian Trail, and you can go through New Brunswick and the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec, and you can go through Nova Scotia and the west coast of Newfoundland, the Long Range Mountains, and that's all part of the Appalachian Mountain Range. So we didn't through hike this. We considered it, but I think it'd be really hard to do 150 watercolor paintings while you're through hiking, so we decided that wasn't the best idea. We ended up using these trails as our guide, so we found extended stay rentals along the way, and we camped and we backpacked and just did a combination of all of that. So the adventure began in April of 2022. It took about a year to get some grants to help fund the project, to find a publisher, Mountaineers Books, to publish the project. And then we were finally ready, and we moved out in May of 2022. And this is our apartment. We were putting everything into storage, packed up our little Prius. We didn't have a fancy adventure vehicle. We just had a little Prius. And we set out. So this was spring in the southern Appalachian Mountains in April, and the buds were just starting to pop on the trees, and it was just really cool to get to watch spring unfold as we moved north. So my process looked like going out every day and looking for natural spaces. And I was not just focused on national parks or state parks. I really wanted to look at all types of natural spaces available to us, public lands. I wasn't trespassing. So I would often start, for example, this was not Waynesboro. This was North Carolina. But I would start when we moved to a new place for a few weeks at a time. I would start with urban nature settings. So reconstructed wetlands or just little parks or river trails. And then as we were there longer, I'd move out to wilderness areas and parks that were within a couple-hour radius of where we were staying. But I would just hike slowly and see what jumped out at me. And one of the things that was really fun about the project was that, first of all, I made it up, so I made the rules. So I got to decide what was tiny, and I kind of determined that 6 inches and smaller was kind of what I wanted to focus on. And so basically anything that was a plant, animal, or a fungi was fair game. So I got to just go outside, listen, look. I did a lot of hiding in shrubs because often if you're actually walking, you're going to scare things away. But if you're hiding, especially near bodies of water, then things will not know you're there, and you can have cool observations. So I would look, and I would take pictures. So you could see I had a wildlife camera. I didn't always take this. This was mostly for days when I knew that I wanted to capture birds because it's hard to get those in detail with your phone. And one of my big goals was to take, and actually it was something that I really wanted to stick to, was taking all of my own reference photos and only depicting the things that I actually saw in person. So there are several species that I really wanted to include in the book, and they are important to the Appalachian Mountains, but I didn't see them, so I could not include them, which was a good incentive for me to get out every day and look carefully. This is a Luna moth that I found in North Carolina. And this was just an early lesson that I learned, which was that sometimes if you go out looking for something specific, you're usually not going to find that thing, but just the act of looking will introduce you to cool other things that you might not have noticed. So I was looking around the bases of apple trees in this old orchard at a homestead in North Carolina. It was a land trust. And so because I was looking low on all these trees, I didn't find any morels. Yeah, I was looking for morels in this apple orchard. Didn't find any morels, but I found this beauty, Luna moth, and that's in my book. I also did some nature journaling along the way. Are there any nature journalers? I knew we had a couple. So nature journaling is really just combining words and pictures and some data to capture an experience outside. So it can look very different between people. Some people are very into the writing, some people are more artistic. But the way that I use it is to make quick sketches from life in person and then also, kind of talk about what I'm seeing. So I did this some. This was actually a nature journal page from Waynesboro because we came through here. We stayed in this area for a month, May of 2022. And this was at the Mulberry Run wetland, is a reconstructed wetland. Well, the first actually, so this was at the Mulberry Run, and then this was something called the Greenway Trail in a housing development. And funny story about that, I got lost on the way to the river trail because there are two Greenway trails in Waynesboro. One is like along the river, and people said that it was good for birding. And then this one was in the middle of a housing development, and it's like a little algae-covered pond. But I'd walked all the way there, so I was like, okay, and it was hot, so I was like, okay, I'll just sit at this pond. I don't think anything is living here, but I'll just see if anything pops out. And sure enough, I saw a beaver swimming in the pond, and I was very shocked. And then I kept looking, and every time I turned to go to walk away, I would see something out of the corner of my eye moving. And so I ended up seeing all this cool stuff at this tiny pond, flood control pond in a housing development, including a snapping turtle, an empty nest of a Canada goose, a bunch of water snakes, and a whole bunch of tiny baby painted turtles that were the size of a quarter. So that was kind of exciting. Here's another nature journal page from the day that I found a river otter in Pennsylvania. It was using this fallen log as its ramp as it went in and out of the river to fish. So it would kind of waddle down the ramp, disappear for a while, and then it would come up with a bunch of reeds and pond or creek scum and fish in its mouth. And I was proud of myself because they are very elusive, but I was hiding well enough that they didn't see me. I got really good at hiding. So I would go out, I would record what I saw using a camera, and I would take notes, and then I would come home and I would try to capture the most interesting thing that I saw that day in watercolor. So I would look at my reference photos and my sketches and figure out a composition. And that was really exciting because I usually plan out my pieces for a really long time. That's kind of how I typically do art, is I do a lot of sketches and get it just right, and then I allow myself to begin. But with this project, I wanted it to feel really full of energy, and I wanted it to feel like you were with me experiencing these things. And so by me seeing something in the morning and then coming back and capturing it on the page, I was able to just free myself up to, I think, translate a little bit of that excitement to the page. This is pretty close by. This is White Top Mountain, a couple hours away in Virginia. You'll notice that my paintings are long and skinny. It's because this is an 8x10 book, which meant that all my spreads needed to be 8 inches by 20 inches. They're long and skinny. And that was kind of weird to get used to. It's just an unusual size, but I ended up really enjoying it. Very annoying to frame. Very not standard frame size. Oh, and I do have a show up. If you're interested in seeing the originals, I have 40 of the originals on display at the Clay Center for Arts and Science in Charleston, West Virginia through December. Okay, so here are a few of the tiny creatures that I found. This is a common friend that we have all over the Appalachian Mountains. But I really like this one because it's an amazing color. This looks washed out. If you've seen one, it's the brightest jack-o'-lantern orange. And eastern red-spotted newts are really cool because they can reverse their life cycle. So this is the juvenile phase, and they live in the woods, and they live on land. They overwinter under logs and leaf litter. And then they're like this for a couple years, and then they move to ponds where they live underwater. And the really cool thing is that if their pond dries up, once they're adults, they can go back to living on land. So they're extremely resilient little critters. And They're my favorite. I have one on the cover of my book because I love them so much. So this is what the painting looked like. As you can see, I enlarged everything a lot because I wanted to just show off all the intricacies, and I wanted people to look at creatures that they might have been familiar with in a new way because they see them on this zoomed in scale. And that's what it looks like as part of the book. This is the adult form down there underwater. Another type of plant that I enjoyed learning about was carnivorous plants. So carnivorous plants ingest the nutrients from insects in order to offset or supplement their nutrition in places like bogs that are very acidic and they don't have a lot of good nutrients. So this is the round-leaved sundew, and you can find it growing in bogs. I think we found it as far south as North Carolina, and then all the way up to Newfoundland. Newfoundland had so much of this, like fields of it. It was so cool. It's really small. It's only a couple inches tall, and it doesn't hide, but it's hard to find because it's found amongst the sphagnum moss. So this is how zoomed in this is. This is one little thing of moss here. So it's really hard to find, but once you do, it's really exciting. It has these like sticky little things on the rosettes to trap the insects, and you can see a few are decomposing there. So this is how I captured that. And this is it in the book. This was a Tennessee shiner, a little fish that we found while stream snorkeling in southwest Virginia in White Top Laurel Creek, which is a really beautiful, clear trout stream. And it's just a few centimeters long. But stream snorkeling was something that we did for the first time on the trip. I keep saying we. I have a husband. He's somewhere, maybe. Oh, yeah, okay. He's seen this talk a lot, so it's okay if you want to leave. But yeah, so he was there for some of the adventures. So sometimes in the book I refer to like we did this, sometimes just me, because he works remotely. So often he was back where we were staying working, and I was out by myself. Also, I was hiking very slowly, and so I didn't want to subject him to that pace. But we did go snorkeling together in this stream. So it was only a few feet deep. But basically with stream snorkeling, you just need a snorkel mask, and you need to tread water or hold on to something so the current doesn't take you. Because if you stand up, you kick up a lot of sediment, and it's harder to see what's down there. But one of my takeaways from this experience was just that like all those little tiny fish that I always used to think of as minnows are actually different species, and they are beautiful when you look at them closely. Like even, this is the mottled sculpin, that's the Tennessee shiner that I just showed before, but like they're just so small that you don't really notice, and then you get them out in the light and you're like, wow, this is gorgeous. Another thing I really enjoyed learning about were slime molds. So slime molds are not fungi. They kind of look like fungi, but they are actually single-celled organisms. They're amoebas, and they come in amazing colors. And you can find them, especially in the summer after a good rain, when the logs are all saturated with water. And they're super interesting because they can move collectively. So you might see a slime mold on a log or like on mulch one day, and then a couple days later, it could be 10 feet away on a different part of the same log, and it's all just like slowly, like you should watch time-lapse videos of slime molds. It's crazy. Yeah, really mind-blowing, very understudied, so I think there's a lot of interesting things we're gonna find out about these soon, but the one on the left is red raspberry slime, and it's just this awesome hot pink color, and this is salmon egg slime, which looks like, or it's also called pushpin slime, lots of common names, but it's just cool because it's just, my finger is there to show scale. It's so tiny. And I would have never seen this, except I bent down to look at what I thought was orange elf cup fungus, which is also really cool, but tiny little orange cups on a log. And then as I was down there, I looked over, and then this was there, and I was like, what is that? So cool. And so this is that spread, and these are all ones that I saw in central PA and eastern West Virginia. Chocolate tube slime, salmon egg slime that we just saw. This one does not have a common name yet, but it looks very much like chewing gum that someone stuck to the wall. This is red raspberry slime. This one's dog vomit slime, which is a little unfortunate And it sometimes is actually pretty. Like this phase is actually pretty and it's bright yellow. Sometimes it really does look like vomit though, because it turns like a white gray. And then this is coral slime, which is also very common. So tonight we are gonna get to see a really awesome kestrel named Clover from the Wildlife Center of Virginia, and I'm gonna be painting Clover live in just a few minutes. But when we were in Pennsylvania, I got to go out with some researchers from Penn State to observe their banding process for baby kestrels. So they have erected a nesting box a few years ago in this farmer's field because kestrels really like where there's trees right next to an open field. That combination of habitats is really nice for them. And they put this box in there, they're cavity nesters, and this family of kestrels moved in, and I think there were 5 babies this year that we were there. And so the researchers got them all out of the nest. These ones were like 14 days old, so very much in their awkward phase. They got them out of the nest and tested their blood or took samples of their blood to test for fertilizer toxins, and put these little silver bracelets on each of their wrists to help identify them and track their migration. It was very special, and my job during this was to snuggle them, to keep them calm between getting sampled. So that was just a really cool experience because they weigh nothing, basically, but they have a really strong heartbeat. Especially these ones, I think they were, obviously stressed, so their hearts were just thumping, but that they weigh nothing. It was just such an interesting thing. And this is how that spread and that experience became part of the book. So with my spreads, some of them are just like a zoomed in feature of a critter, and sometimes I wanted to capture a whole experience. So here's the banding box. This is the ladder that the researcher used to get him out. This is the mother and father kestrel who were squawking up a storm nearby. The babies kept calling back and forth to the parents. And then here's the edge of the notebook that has kestrel data with like tarsus length, time, box, date, all the data about each kestrel. So I'm just gonna flip through a couple more paintings that are some of my favorites. This is bunchberry and bluebead lily, and I saw these two plants growing together a lot in kind of like the New England, White Mountains, Green Mountains area. I was very excited when mushroom season came. I really love painting mushrooms. Very colorful and they're very weird, so just like great subject matter. But the fungi took a really long time to come out on this year, so it wasn't until late July that the first few started to emerge, other than a few morels and stuff in the spring. And so all of these I saw on a walk in Baxter State Park, like within just a few feet of each other, and I was in heaven. This is a little black and white warbler that I met in Newfoundland. So there's this very interesting habitat there called Tuckamore, where the winds coming off the ocean are so intense that they blow the evergreens sideways, and they all form this like mangled mess, basically, and you can knock it through. Like you will rip up your clothing and your skin and everything if you try to get through this mess. But I had heard that a lot of animals use that as habitat, so I was very curious about what would be living in there, and I kept seeing it. Every time I'd walk around the coast, I'd see this like ominous hidden world in there, and I really wanted to go inside. And so one day I was walking the coastal trail and saw a pathway through that was probably created by an animal, maybe a caribou or a moose. And I went inside, and it was like super dark, and instantly it got to be really quiet in there because, the wind is whipping and the waves are crashing outside, and then you go in and it's just like silent, and it's mossy, and the only things growing were mushrooms and ghost pipes because they don't need a lot of sunlight. And yeah, it was just like pure stillness because it forms a full canopy over the whole roof, basically, too. And so it's really dark. It was awesome. And every time I went in, I returned to that spot a few more times, and every time I went in, there was a black and white warbler in there. And I don't know if it was the same one, probably not, but it was just kind of cool to have that little friend that I could count on being there. So this was from one of the final adventures of the trip. We didn't do a lot of intense things. The goal wasn't to summit a whole bunch of peaks and stuff, but we did do a couple more adventurous things, and one of them was hiking the Long Range Traverse, which is a 5-day backpacking trip through the wilderness of Newfoundland, and there are no trails, and so you have to use your map and compass and a GPS if it works. Ours did not really work, so it was really interesting because there are all these freshwater fjords in Newfoundland. It's a little washed out, but you can see it's very misty, and there are all these sheer cliffs. And so basically, freshwater fjords were once part of the sea, they're once connected to the sea, so they were saltwater, and then the rocks shifted, and now they're cut off from the ocean. And so they're considered long, skinny ponds. But whale bones have been found there in this pond, and seashells and fossils to indicate that it was part of the sea. And so the way that we got out here was a tourist boat took us down this long fjord, and it was filled with people that were just doing a little boat trip for like an hour or two, and then they were all gonna turn around and go back home. But then there's like this one little lonely dock at the very end, and that's where they had us get off, and it was just me and Ben. It's very heavily permitted because it's very like protected, pristine wilderness. So only 12 people a day can do this trek, can like start on the trek, and you have to get permits like 8 months in advance or something. So we were very excited to get to do it. We were the only people going that day, and so we didn't see anybody else the whole time. But it was just very funny when they dropped us off at the dock. Nobody knew what we were doing, and all these people on the boat trip were like, "Oh my God, no, don't go! Like, what are you doing?" And they were taking pictures of us like we were going to be missing people on the news, and they kept saying things like, "We hope there are no bears out there." And we were like, "Yeah, actually there are, but like the rangers said that they're very like they're not used to people, so you'll be fine." And they'd say, "Hope there are good trails out there." And we were like, "There are none." So they were very worried. And honestly, it was like there were definitely moments where I was concerned too. It was very beautiful for like 2 of the days, and then it got really windy and really rainy and really cold. So, but one of the interesting things about this experience was, as we were taking the tourist boat in, I just remember the guide saying, like pointing to the cliffs and the waterfalls on either side and saying, "To your left and right, you'll see the ancient Appalachian Mountains towering overhead." And it was just interesting to like have started in Alabama and gone all the way through these places that, you know, I think we all associate strongly with the mountains, and we feel like we're the real Appalachians. But people all the way up through the mountain range also connect with them, and it's, you know, part of their experience of home. So that was just a neat experience of like, okay, we're here, we're in a fjord, there were like whale bones over there, and it's the Appalachian Mountains. It was just kind of special. So when I got back, one of the things that I needed to add to the book, because having a publisher is great, but they also ask you to do extra stuff sometimes. And they asked me to do 15 illustrated maps for the book after I got back. And so I spent several months working on those. And the idea was that there are certain people that might not connect with certain species or plants and or animals. You know, they might not be like nature buffs, but a lot of people have been to different parks that we ended up going through on the way, and they might resonate with like the landscapes, and that could be kind of the gateway drug to get them interested in the nature that's there. So it's Baxter State Park in Maine. This is where Mount Katahdin is. And this is how those maps became integrated into the project as public land spotlights. And here's the cover that it took me several months to figure out exactly how I wanted the cover to be, but this is when I finished it. And everything in the book was done by hand. So I did everything with a sketch first, and then I went over it with, sometimes I did pen and ink, and then I went over it with watercolor, like for the maps or like really detailed things. And then everything else was just watercolor. And it was really important for me to do everything by hand and only have like the scanning process be the only kind of digital component, because I just think that making books by hand is becoming a lost art. I think publishing has shifted so much, and often there's such a time crunch to like get everything done so quickly that, you know, a lot of corners are cut. And with this project, I wanted it to be the book that I always wanted to make, and that book meant, you know, lots of painting time. And so, yeah, everything was in my hand. This is me on the last weekend that we were there. We went out to the very close to the northernmost tip of Newfoundland, and it was just interesting to like be walking out there. I remember feeling like a little nervous of like, okay, this trip that I'd planned for a year and then we've been on for 6 months is ending like in 2 minutes. How am I gonna feel? And I just felt so grateful. I felt so grateful to live in this mountain range and to have a whole lifetime to get to know it better. And I just felt like I'd learned so much in 6 months, but I also still had so much more to learn. And it's just such an amazing feeling to feel like you're just at the beginning of something. So the final book looks kind of like this. I think it's just fun to see some of the originals next to the finished book. I tried to be really true to the colors. So like I scanned everything in, and then I would go into Photoshop and match the colors so that the originals look just like the printed book. And in some cases, like the original, I ended up cutting out the brown background because I didn't feel like I needed it for the final, but pretty much the same. Yeah, there's my book. Yep. So now for our second half of the show, we're gonna do a little live painting.
After for a period of like 4 or 5 months, something like that, and then they decided to release her back in the wild. So in her case, she was taken when she was 16 days old, so she never got to learn from her parents how to be a kestrel, how to hunt for food, how to avoid predators, and do all the things that a kestrel needs to do to be successful. And she stayed with people, so instead she thought she should be with people. People provided food. So she imprinted on people. And now she's back in the wild. She has no idea how to survive.
Turning her just a little so I can start sketching. Maybe like
Add some pink and candy.
yeah. Actually, maybe if you tilt your glove this way, yes, and I'll get a profile like that. Yeah. There we go, Clover. Aww.
So she's in the wild. She doesn't know how to take care of herself, and she very quickly starts to not do well. She loses weight. Eventually, she was found at a local gas station not too far from the wildlife center, where she was flying up people and essentially begging for food. Now, us at the wildlife center, we would know what that behavior looks like. But you can imagine someone's at the gas station, they're putting gas in their car, all of a sudden they turn, and this little kestrel here is flying at their face. It could be a startling experience. So someone got startled and kind of swatted her, and she fell to the ground. Luckily, she wasn't hurt at all. She came to the wildlife center, and she was just very hungry. And we realized very quickly that she was imprinted on people, because when we walked into her enclosure, when we first got her, we put her in her enclosure, we had a rehab team member go in, and she flew right on top of her head and just sat there. And we're like, you know what, this is not normal bird behavior. Obviously, they should be afraid of us. They shouldn't want to come and sit on our head. So they called the outreach team in. They started to evaluate her behavior, and we're like, yep, she's definitely imprinted on people. And we didn't get the full story until later, because she had, kind of like the kestrels that you were getting, she had a band on her leg, the falconers had put there. And so we were able to get, contact those falconers by reporting that band number and learn her entire backstory. That's how we learned how she came to falconers. Now, because she's imprinted on people, we deemed right then that she could not go back out in the wild. She just wouldn't have the skills to survive in the wild. But we decided, you know what, she probably makes a really great member of our education ambassador team. One of the things we do with our education ambassadors is we bring them to programs like maybe at schools or libraries where they can connect with students and people and tell their stories so that we can help protect them. And as you can see, she's pretty comfortable around people, and that's part of the reason we decided she might be a good ambassador, because of her comfort around people. So we started doing some training with her. it really didn't take long. She was ready for programs probably a couple of months after we started. Sorry. But we couldn't bring her to programs right away because even though she was ready, we needed to officially get her on the Wildlife Center permits. Now, state permits, that was a breeze. State permits come back in like a day. We know is that we have this bird, we want to make her part of our ambassador team, and boom, they got back to us. Federal permits is a different process. We submitted all the paperwork, and then we had to wait a very short period of 1.5 years before we heard back from them. But when we finally did get back, they said, yeah, she could join your team. So she officially became an ambassador and started coming with us to our normal programs. And she's become one of our ambassadors that we'll bring out for not just normal programs, but special events. She was recently on the news. She was in studio in the newsroom because she was
She poop on their studio. Did she poop on their studio too?
She did. Twice. I apologize a lot. And I was like, you know what? If you can imagine a new studio, there's cameras and lights everywhere. And like, I don't know how she's gonna do, but let's give it a try. And she did great. So at this point, I'm thinking, you know what? There's not a lot that Clover hasn't done. Until today. This is a new one for her. She's never had a portrait. So both her and I are very excited.
Yeah, do we have any questions from the audience about her story, about what Rosalie's doing right now? Any kind of questions at all? Yeah.
I'm just curious what's going on with her. She's like bobbing her head.
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot. Yes, repeat the question. Why is she bobbing her head? I get that question a lot at programs, and I mean, truthfully, I don't exactly know why. I think it's just kind of like a manner that they do, kind of like some people, when they kind of stand, they just kind of sway side to side a little bit, pop their hip out to get a little bit more comfortable. I kind of think of it like that. I think there's also a little bit of curiosity involved sometimes when there's new venues for her. Sometimes I see her bob that head more and kind of look around more curiously at things. But what we're constantly doing whenever we have an ambassador like this out is we're evaluating their behavior. We want to look for signs of any stress. You might have saw a little bit when this new mic was introduced. You saw her kind of like, flap her wings. She was like, ooh, what's that? But she quickly calmed down. We're looking at things like, her feathers are kind of puffed out a little bit. That's, she's not really pulling her feathers in tight, alert, trying to figure out how to escape. She looks very comfortable right now. So that's something we're constantly looking at when we're evaluating them at programs. Yeah, right in the back there.
Question for Rosalie. In your Prius, when you packed, did you take reference books with you?
I took field guides. Yeah, I took field guides and then used the internet a lot to help me. And then after I got home, especially relied on a lot of professors and different people that have written field guides to answer questions and help me. Often there were like 2 species that it could be, and so they would help me confirm my identifications. But yeah. Any other questions?
Yes.
Did you ever find out what's going on with her coloration?
Not really. I mean, it's likely just a natural variation. They can come in different patterns and colors. They intended to do a research paper to look into it, but they never really followed through with that. And we didn't really have any interest ourselves to kind of understand why. It's probably just genetics. Great question, though.
So to explain a little bit of what I'm doing right now, the angle is a little weird. It makes her look very bottom heavy. But
Did you hear that, Clover?
Yeah, sorry. That's not a good confidence boost on your first modeling job. But so yeah, basically I started with a very loose pencil sketch, and she is moving quite a bit, especially her head. So every time she turns her head, and it's a good angle, I try to like get one more little detail on the head. And I did the pencil sketch really lightly and loosely, and then now I'm going over it with like blue-gray, because she has a lot of blue-gray on her, and that's just a very good layer to like start building up detail, because it's not too bold all at once. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep adding a little more detail. I'm not gonna take you through my entire painting process. If I were to sit down and do a painting of Clover for my book, it would probably take a full day or more. But this is kind of how I like capture something quickly from life. It's just, you know, loose, lots of little strokes coming together, and then taking advantage when she's doing the right pose. It's really, really helpful.
I think she approves. It seems like she's looking at the screen there.
Oh, that's true. And she's nodding at herself.
I think I saw a question right over here.
I did have a question about Clover, and you were telling me there's another kestrel at the Wildlife Center. Do they, do you notice their different personalities, and do they interact?
Yes, we definitely get to know each ambassador animal we work with has their individual personality, just like, you know, your pets at home do. And she does. She has a neighbor kestrel. His name is Verlin. And they're not so interested in each other because they're both imprinted on people. So they're more interested in people than they are their own species. And they when we put them next to each other, they kind of squabbled. So we did kind of put some plywood boards between so they didn't mess with each other and could live peacefully next to each other. But what was very, very cute, I think it was last year we discovered this, is around the breeding season, we noticed that Clover here was gaining a lot of weight. And then her neighbor, Verlin, was losing a lot of weight. And I was just like, what's going on? Nothing serious, like, you know, not a medical concern, but just a weird trend. And I was trying to think what might be happening. Is it something I'm doing with the diet? Are they catching some food on their own? What's going on? And then one day we're walking by, and I see Verlin take some of his food, and he went up to the one corner of the enclosure that they can kind of like reach each other through a little bit, and he was sticking the food through and giving it to Clover during the breeding season so she could have all the food she needs to have little babies. So that was just a cool moment that, you know, normally they're not that interested in each other, but certain times of the year, like the breeding season, they'll take some interest. How much does she weigh? Rosalie is right. They weigh like nothing. She weighs 140 grams, and that's actually a little heavy for her. But it feels like I'm holding a cupcake right now. So really, it's you know, the hollow bones, lightweight feathers. They need to be very agile flyers. So hardly anything. Her neighbor Verlin's a little lighter weight. He's like 120 grams. I think I saw a question right behind you there, yeah.
I have a question for Rosalie. Do you have a preference for watercolor that you use, or are you going to be consistent with what type of watercolor?
Well, I go through with phases. So for about a couple years, somebody, this really kind man came to a talk that I gave a few years ago, and his wife had recently passed away, and she'd been a big watercolorist. And he gave me a huge box of Daniel Smith watercolors, which are really expensive. It was like a lifetime supply. So I've been working with those ever since I actually did almost all the paintings in the book with the paints from her. And she was a botanical illustrator, so that was cool. But partway through the process, actually when we were in Waynesboro, I went to the Michaels that's here, and I found something called P.H. Martin's Hydrus liquid watercolors, and they are like neon watercolors. And so there are some spreads that you can tell I used those in the book because it's like, whoa. I definitely had to like use that watercolor sparingly because, you know, I wanted it to still be like pretty realistic, but I definitely think that it's fun to, you know, like maintain biological accuracy and get like the markings right, get the size right, proportions right, but also have fun with like really colorful backgrounds and adding, your artistic touch wherever you can. So, but yeah, I would say Daniel Smith are my go-to, but also Winsor and Newton are really good. There's so many good ones. I feel like the biggest difference is in the paper. I'm using Arch's 300-pound paper, which is pricey but really thick, and often watercolor paper like bends and buckles when you're painting, but this paper doesn't. So it's really nice. It makes a big difference.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Is there a part of an animal that you find the hardest to capture? Like, I know when people are trying to maybe draw a sketch of a person, they always like the eyes are so hard to capture or something.
Yeah. I think it really depends on the animal.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, maybe let's see about, I feel like the feet on Clover are a little tricky because she keeps kind of switching her footing a little bit. Yeah, maybe the feet are the hardest.
You can see that tucks them up sometimes too.
Yeah. It's funny, she really doesn't, okay. So she gives me like 1 second here and there on the side of her face, and I'm trying to, there are a few things on kestrels that are really like iconic, like the banding on their faces, the curved beak, and the eye spots, which she doesn't do. Both male and female have the eye spots on the back of the head.
I'm not quite sure.
She
Do they?
definitely doesn't.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe it's just this time of year they're more muted or something, but usually the eye spots and then the barring on the feathers and the tail are very iconic, and then the kind of like squarish head, rectangular squarish head. Can you see it there? It's kind of flat on top. So those are a few iconic kestrel things. Good question.
So before she came out today, or earlier today, said she got lots of treats, of course. So she usually enjoys coming out because she knows that's part of the process. But as far as what she eats, she gets a variety of foods. The main thing we feed is mice. It's not live food. We get it just like you get your food at the grocery store. It's usually frozen. We'll thaw it out. And then she has her nice little mice treats. Sometimes she'll get chicks as well. We'll vary up the food items throughout the week. But sometimes, even though they wouldn't be able to survive in the wild, Clover here sometimes is still able to catch her own food if different insects or something decide to go in her enclosure. And she's like, you know what? I'm hungry and I'm going to make a meal out of that. In fact, have you guys heard about spotted lanternflies at all? Yeah, very, very unfortunate that we have them here in Waynesboro now, but Clover here is doing her part. She has eradicated at least 3 spotted lanternflies so far.
Really making a dent.
So I think we can make her part of the anti-spotted lanternfly program here in Waynesboro.
Yay, Clover.
So she's doing great. She generally gets food twice a day. They've got very, very high metabolisms, but somewhat small stomachs. So we'll feed them at least twice a day so that we're not just throwing their whole meal at them at once. In the wild, they're going to eat a variety of foods. Insects make up a big portion of their diet. They're very graceful flyers, and they'll catch them right out of the air. But they'll even, they'll eat small mammals. There's times they'll even eat other smaller birds like finches or sparrows. So they'll eat a variety of things. Who here has seen a kestrel in the wild before? Oh, that's awesome. That's a good number of you. I don't know if this is something I heard. I never really checked it out, but I've heard that, if you're ever at a sporting event or a concert where they have that big stadium lights and it's not quite dark out yet, like dusk, there's a chance you may see a kestrel kind of around that area because all the insects that are attracted to those lights, they like to catch them. So that's your maybe tip to try to find one if you're ever in one of those areas.
Anybody have any book questions or anything like that as I wrap up? I'm going to probably wrap up in just a couple minutes and then sign any books for people and then probably finish this later. So if you wanted to stick around and see the finished thing, but I won't make you sit for the whole time. Any final questions?
Oh, over there, yes.
Do you have any advice to give to someone that is just starting watercolor painting?
Yes, I would say it really helps to start with a drawing, like an ink drawing first, going over it with watercolor, and then develop your confidence that way, get to know the medium, and then once you feel like you have more control, then move on to just watercolor. A few of my favorite tricks are to just not use a lot of water when you paint, especially if you are interested in like nature illustration and you want to get a lot of good details, because the more water that you use, the more it's going to run together and bleed together. So I kind of treat painting like drawing. Like I'll do the first layer and it'll be, I'll block it in and use a bigger brush and use more water, let that dry. And then I use pretty small brushes to go back in and just slowly build up the layers. So yeah, thinking of it more like drawing instead of like painting, like using a lot of water. I think that's where people get like intimidated, is when the paint just starts to go crazy. Yeah. And then definitely like using nicer paper is a big help. Oh, another thing is to use 2D references. So like drawing something like Clover here in person is much more tricky than drawing from a picture of a kestrel, because it's already 2D, it's flat. And so like things like, it doesn't have to be from a photo, but something that's flat, like a leaf, is a nice place to gain some confidence.
And as we're kind of approaching the end here, again, this is the Gala Week for our Wildlife Center, and we are hosting our online auction. It's open right now. You can go to our website and check out all of the items there. And one of the very special items soon to be there is this wonderful painting of Clover. So if you love Clover as much as I do, and you're like, you know what I need in my life? I need a painting of Clover on my wall, so I can remember this moment forever. You will have the chance to bid on this item. And there's so many other great items too. So definitely check it out. It's free to register. There's everything from wildlife excursions, animal artwork, art that was even created by our animals as well. So definitely check it out, and hopefully we'll get this posted probably.
It's actually posted now. I mean, you can bid on
Yeah.
it right now. We'll just, the final product, the bids are coming in, so.
There's already 6 bids, so get in there before somebody else gets it.
No pressure. I'm putting in a branch. Clearly that's not there, but I debated whether or not to paint Connor. I thought that might take too long, so.
It looks a little bit more natural than the glove, probably.
Yeah, so putting.
We'll auction the painting of Clover next.
Big money, big money.
So it's wildlifecenter.org.
Wildlifecenter.org, yeah. And you'll see right on the front page there, you can find a link to our gala. It's also under the news and events section. And then it'll have all of the information for all the programs we're having this week, as well as a link to check out the auction items. The auction ends this Saturday at 9 p.m. So you've got some time to look through it, see what items really speak to you. We've got an elk viewing tour in Southwest Virginia is one of the really cool ones this year. It's a pretty exclusive experience. We've got framed paw prints from our bear cubs, which is really cute. And there's, some of the experiences are really Wildlife Center focused. There's the chance to release some of the patients with us to go to a bald eagle release, open the crate door and see that bird go back to the wild, or join us for the release of some of our little guys as well, some possums, some cottontails, maybe even a kestrel. So lots of great items.
Okay, well, I'm wrapping up. I did remember one thing that somebody usually asks me a question about, like, what it was like to come back home after being in all these interesting places. And we ended up living right next to the farm for like 8 months as we were figuring out our next step. And I just wanted to reflect on how, going away on this trip, part of it was to understand the Appalachian Mountains better, gain an appreciation, and share, what's still here and alive. And it was just so interesting coming back to the farm that I'd always lived on after seeing, we were just on the heels of Newfoundland, which was really pristine wilderness. And I was nervous to come back home because I was like, oh no, am I just gonna see how much, more we need to do to make this place healthy again. And it was really interesting to see all of these critters that I never knew were on the farm the whole time. And it just took me learning more about them on the trip. And then for example, I always had known about the red-effed salamander, but never had seen them in their adult form when they're brown until we came back. And then I found them in the strip ponds on the farm. So the same critter that's on the cover, which I knew the whole time, this is I want this one on the cover, is on our farm. I'd just never seen the orange juvenile version. And then a bird became kind of my muse. There was an eastern screech owl that I found a month or two after we got back home, just in a hollow tree. And that owl stayed, it was small, it was tiny-ish. It was 7 inches, 6 or 7 inches. So I included it in the book. It's at the very end. But yeah, this eastern screech owl stayed all winter, and then it came back the next year, 2023. It came back the same red morph eastern screech owl, and it was just kind of my reminder that even in the place that I grew up in, even in a place that I've had mixed relationships with, there are amazing things to be found, and often they're hiding, but if you just keep looking, you'll find them. But thank you all so much for coming, and I'll be over there signing books.